to Deep Sleep Stories. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. If these stories help you relax or fall asleep, a short review, comment, or sharing the podcast with someone who might benefit is a simple and meaningful way to support the show so that we may continue to offer it for free. Now, take a slow, gentle breath and let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, a quiet place where your mind can soften and your body can rest. And tonight, you'll drift through a world of dewdrops and daydreams, where morning light is gentle and every breath feels like a lullaby. Settle in now, just as you are. Let your shoulders loosen as if they can melt a little into the pillow. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands rest without holding on to anything at all. If there's any tension behind your eyes, imagine it smoothing out like calm water after a ripple. You can begin with a slow breath in and an even slower breath out. Another breath in, cool and clean, as if it's drawn from a quiet meadow at dawn. And another breath out, letting the day slip away from you, one small piece at a time. You don't need to solve anything right now. You don't need to plan. You don't need to replay the moments that have already happened. In this space, you are allowed to be unhurried. As you breathe, imagine a soft morning fog rolling over a field. Not thick, not heavy, just a tender veil, silver in the earliest light. The air is fresh and still. Somewhere nearby, a small stream speaks in whispers over smooth stones, and the sound doesn't ask for your attention. It only offers comfort. The ground beneath you in this imagined place is springy with moss and new grass. Each blade holds a tiny bead of water, and each bead catches the faintest hint of sunrise, as though the whole meadow is quietly lit from within. With every breath, you can feel yourself arriving here more fully. With every exhale, you can let your thoughts drift to the edges where they can blur and soften. And as you settle into that gentle blur, the story can begin to carry itself the way a slow river carries fallen petals. Now, without any effort at all, you can let the perspective shift. You can become a quiet listener, safe and warm, while the tale moves on in its own calm rhythm. In a valley tucked between low, rounded hills, there was a meadow that seemed to wake up more slowly than anywhere else. Dawn arrived there as a kind visitor, never abrupt, never too bright. It would first brush the tips of the grasses with pale gold, then pause, as if listening to the sleeping earth. The air would hold the cool sweetness of night for a little longer, and the mist would linger like a soft shawl. Every morning the meadow wore its dewdrops like a secret jewelry, tiny spheres of water balanced on leaves, on stems, on the edges of petals. They trembled when a breeze passed through, but they didn't fall. They simply shivered with light, as if giggling in silence. The meadow was bordered by a small birch grove to the east, where white trunks rose like quiet pillars. On the west side, a thicket of wild roses climbed and curled, offering pale blossoms that smelled faintly of honey. And near the center of the meadow, there was a shallow pond shaped like a crescent moon, Its surface was so still at dawn that it often reflected two skies at once, the real one above and the dreamlike one that seemed to live in the water. In this valley, there was a path made of old flat stones, set into the earth as though they had always been there. The stones were warm by midday and cool by morning, and they led from the birch grove toward the crescent pond, then curved gently away toward the hills. It was not a path that hurried anyone. It was the kind of path that asked, in its own patient way, for slow footsteps and easy breaths. On one especially tender morning, when the fog was thin and the birds were singing in half voices, a traveler came to the valley. He was not the sort of traveler who carried heavy bags or sharp ambitions. He carried only a small satchel, light enough to forget about, and he walked as if he were listening for something kind. His name, if names were needed, was Rowan. He had the look of someone who had known long roads and long quiet. His cloak was the color of dried leaves, and his boots were worn but well cared for. He had gentle eyes that didn't seem startled by stillness. When he stepped onto the stone path and felt the cool of morning rise through his soles, he slowed even more, as though the meadow had spoken to him without words. Rowan didn't come with a plan. He had only a feeling. An old, soft tug in his chest. The sense that there was a place where thoughts could become lighter. Somewhere, he believed, there was a kind of peace that didn't need to be chased. It could be noticed, the way one notices the scent of rain before it arrives. As he walked, his breath began to match the valley's rhythm. Inhale, exhale, the same pace as mist drifting between grasses. He noticed the dewdrops first. They were everywhere, thousands and thousands of tiny mirrors. Each one held a tiny reflection of the world, curved and sparkling like miniature moons. He paused by a cluster of wildflowers and leaned closer. In one dewdrop, perched on a petal, he saw the sky turned upside down. In another, he saw a distorted, gentle version of his own face, softened, rounded by water. The dewdrops seemed to hold a quiet magic, not the kind that shouted, but the kind that hummed. Rowan reached out carefully and held his finger near one dewdrop. It clung to the leaf edge, swollen with light. When his fingertip finally touched it, the dewdrop slid onto his skin like a cool bead. For a moment it stayed whole, perfect, round, shimmering, before it spread into a thin wetness that disappeared into warmth. And as it disappeared, something inside Rowan's mind loosened just slightly. It felt like a knot, untangling without pain. He blinked once, slow and surprised, and he realized he had been holding a thought too tightly for too long. He couldn't even remember what the thought had been. It was simply gone, released like a feather from an open palm. He stood very still, listening. The meadow didn't make demands. The pond didn't call out. The birch grove didn't rush him. Everything simply existed. And in that simple existence, Rowan felt his shoulders drop another small inch. He began to walk again, following the stones. Dew clung to the edges of the path, and when he brushed past tall grasses, They bowed and shook, sending tiny droplets into the air. The droplets rose like small shining sparks and fell again in silence. As he moved closer to the crescent pond, the mist thinned and the light grew warmer. The pond's surface held a soft sheen, and a few lily pads floated near the shallow edge. A dragonfly hovered above the water, its wings catching the sun like panes of glass. Rowan sat on a smooth rock at the pond's edge. The rock was cool and slightly damp. He set his satchel beside him and let his hands rest on his knees. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't do anything. He simply watched. In the pond's reflection, clouds drifted slowly. Their edges were blurred by the slightest movement of water. Rowan's own reflection sat among them, a quiet figure in a quiet world. If someone had looked closely, they might have seen how his expression softened, how his gaze became less focused on details and more open to feeling. It was then that he noticed something peculiar. Near the water line where the grasses leaned toward the pond, there were dewdrops that seemed brighter. Not just reflective, not just sparkling. These dewdrops held light in a way that didn't belong solely to the sun. They shimmered with an inner glow, faint but undeniable, like a secret lantern behind frosted glass. Rowan leaned forward, curious in the gentlest way. He didn't feel alert in the sharp sense. He felt dreamy, drawn by something calm. One glowing dewdrop rested on the tip of a reed. It swayed slightly, never falling. In its curved surface, Rowan saw something that wasn't the meadow. He saw a different place, soft shapes, pastel colors, a sense of floating. It looked like a memory, yet it didn't feel like his. He blinked, and the vision remained. He tilted his head, and the dewdrop's tiny world shifted, as though it were a window. Rowan's breath grew slower, as if the pond itself were breathing with him. He reached out with one finger again, not touching this time, only hovering close. The glowing dewdrop trembled, a faint sound, barely more than a feeling, brushed his awareness, like the echo of a lullaby heard through a wall. Without warning, and without any fear, the dewdrop lifted from the reed. It rose into the air, drifting upward as though carried by an invisible, gentle current. It hovered in front of Rowan's face, close enough that he could see the tiny world inside it in greater detail. And then another glowing dewdrop rose, and another, and another, lifting from leaves and grass tips, floating toward him in a slow spiral. They didn't rush. They gathered like fireflies, quiet and patient, forming a loose constellation around him. Rowan sat still, not startled, not tense. The meadow seemed to be inviting him into something soft and sweet. A daydream, perhaps, or the place where daydreams were born. The dewdrops circled him, each one reflecting a different scene: a sunlit kitchen with a kettle steaming, a forest path covered in moss, a candlelit room where pages turned in a book, a field of lavender under a violet sky. Small, peaceful moments, the kind of moments that felt like resting. Rowan's eyelids grew heavy, but not with sleep in the ordinary sense. It was a pleasant heaviness, like sinking into warm water. The pond's surface remained still, yet it seemed to shimmer, as if it were responding to the glowing dewdrops. One dewdrop drifted closer than the rest. In its surface, Rowan saw the crescent pond, but the pond was filled with starlight instead of water. The stars swirled slowly, as if the sky had decided to pour itself into the valley. The dewdrop touched Rowan's forehead as lightly as a kiss. At that moment, the world softened around him. Not in a dizzy way, not in a dramatic way. It softened like a blanket being drawn over a sleeping child. The meadow's colors grew more pastel. The edges of things became slightly blurred. The fog returned, but it was luminous now, glowing faintly from within. The sound of the stream became more melodic, like distant chimes. And Rowan felt with calm certainty that he had stepped into a place that wasn't entirely awake and wasn't entirely asleep. He was in between, in the gentle corridor where daydreams drifted. The glowing dewdrops floated ahead of him, and Rowan found himself standing, though he didn't remember deciding to. He followed them down the stone path. But the path was different now. The stones seemed smoother, as if polished by moonlight. The grasses on either side leaned in, as if listening. The birch trees shimmered with pale silver, their leaves rustling in whispers. Rowan walked as one walks in a pleasant dream, unhurried, weightless, certain that he would arrive wherever he needed to be. The dewdrops led him toward the birch grove, but instead of entering the trees as he had expected, they gathered in the air just before the first row of trunks. They hovered there, forming a curved arch, a doorway made of suspended shining beads. Within the arch, the air looked different. It looked deeper, like looking into a calm lake and realizing it goes down and down, far beyond what the surface suggests. Rowan stepped forward, and the moment he passed through the arch, he felt as if the world had taken a soft breath. On the other side was a glade that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps it had always been there, hidden behind ordinary sight. The ground was covered in pale moss that felt like velvet underfoot. Tiny white flowers dotted the moss like stars. The birch trunks formed a natural circle, and at the center of that circle stood a stone basin filled with clear water. The water in the basin was perfectly still, yet it held motion inside it, slow swirls like drifting clouds. Around the basin, the air was cooler, and it smelled of mint and rain. Rowan approached the basin. The glowing dewdrops floated above it, hovering like guardians. He leaned over the water and looked down. Instead of his reflection, he saw a vast sky. Not the sky above the valley, but a sky layered with dawn and dusk at once, as if time had softened and folded. In that sky there were small islands of cloud, and on those clouds, tiny scenes played out like gentle memories. He saw someone sitting by a window, watching rain. He saw a child's hands cupping a ladybug. He saw a lantern swinging in the dark, lighting a path. He saw a person writing slowly in a journal, their face calm. These weren't dramatic visions. They were quiet, comforting fragments, like the kinds of thoughts that drift in when the world is safe. Rowan's breathing deepened. His chest rose and fell, as if guided by the basin's slow swirling water. As he watched, a shape emerged from the water's sky, a figure made of mist and light, not frightening, not imposing. The figure was small, almost delicate, with a presence like moonlight on snow. It stepped up from the basin as though climbing from a shallow pool. Water did not drip from it. Light did not spill. It simply became more distinct. The figure looked like a person, but softened at the edges, as if drawn from fog. Its eyes were bright, like tiny dewdrops, reflecting morning. It regarded Rowan with quiet kindness. When it spoke, the sound was less a voice and more a thought shaped into music. You have come to the place where the day rests, it seemed to say. You have stepped into the cradle of gentle imagination. Rowan didn't feel the need to answer with words. His body felt relaxed, his mind open and slow. Still, some part of him understood. The figure lifted a hand and a single glowing dewdrop formed above its palm. The dewdrop spun slowly, reflecting the glade, the birches, the basin. Dewdrops are small, the figure's presence seemed to whisper, but they hold entire skies. Daydreams are quiet, but they can carry you far. The dewdrop drifted toward Rowan. When he looked into it, he saw a path through a garden, a bench beneath an old tree, a place that felt like rest. The figure made a gentle gesture toward the mossy ground. Rowan understood without effort. He could sit here as long as he liked. He could drink in calm. He could let go of the weight he'd been carrying without naming it. Rowan sat down on the moss. It yielded under him like a cushion. He placed his hands on his thighs and let his fingers loosen. His eyelids fluttered, half closing. The glowing dewdrops, one by one, descended and settled around him on the moss and on the flowers, as though they had found their places. The figure stepped closer, not invading, only accompanying. It lowered itself to sit across from Rowan, and in the quiet circle of birch trunks, the air became even softer. From somewhere beyond sight, a delicate sound drifted in, like wind chimes far away, barely audible. It made the space feel protected, sheltered from anything harsh. Rowan's thoughts began to drift, not in the anxious way of scattered worry, but in the natural way of a leaf floating along a stream. He didn't have to steer them. He didn't have to hold them. In the basin, the sky water continued to swirl, and the scenes within it slowly changed. Rowan watched for a while, then his eyes began to close more fully. But even as his eyes closed, he could still sense the presence of the glade, the moss, the luminous dewdrops. The figure across from him lifted its hands and, with a motion as light as breath, seemed to gather the surrounding quiet. The quiet thickened slightly, becoming something that could be wrapped around a person. A gentle warmth spread through Rowan's chest, like the comfort of a familiar blanket. He realized he could release the last of his tension now. He could let it flow out through his limbs, down into the moss, where it would be absorbed and softened by the earth. His shoulders dropped further. His neck relaxed. The small muscles around his mouth eased, and his brow smoothed. In the space between waking and sleep, the glade seemed to shift again, becoming even more dreamlike. The birch trunks rose higher than before, stretching upward into a pale sky that glowed like pearl. The tiny flowers on the moss shone faintly, and the glowing dewdrops around Rowan pulsed gently, as if breathing. The figure's presence seemed to hum a slow, soothing melody. Not a tune that demanded attention, more like a vibration of peace. Rowan's mind floated on that hum, and then, as easily as a sigh, he found himself walking again. This time he walked not on stones, but on a path made of soft light. It curved through a landscape that felt like the essence of the meadow rather than the meadow itself. Grasses were taller here, swaying in slow motion. Flowers opened and closed in a lazy rhythm. The air was filled with sparkling moisture, tiny suspended droplets like a gentle rain that never fell. Rowan was not alone. The glowing dewdrops floated beside him, and the mist figure walked a little ahead, guiding without urgency. They moved toward a hill that rose gently like a sleeping animal. At the top of the hill there was a tree unlike any Rowan had seen. Its trunk was smooth and pale, and its branches spread wide like welcoming arms. Instead of leaves, it held countless tiny crystal droplets, each one hanging like a pendant. The tree's dewdrops did not fall. They shimmered, reflecting not only light, but soft emotions, comfort, nostalgia, tenderness, ease. Rowan approached the tree, feeling drawn to its calm radiance. Beneath it, the ground was covered with thick, plush grass, and the air was warm, as if the sun were always just behind a cloud. The mist figure turned, and its eyes, bright as dew, seemed to smile. It lifted a hand to the tree, and one crystal droplet detached and floated down, hovering in front of Rowan. When Rowan looked into this droplet, he saw a room with a fireplace glowing low, a mug of tea steaming on a table, a soft chair with a blanket draped over it. The scene felt so cozy that his body responded as though it were real. His chest warmed, his breathing slowed further. The droplet drifted closer until it touched his palm. It didn't soak him. It didn't dissolve. It simply rested there, cool and luminous. Rowan felt a thought form, slow and gentle. Rest is not a reward. Rest is a place you can return to. It is always there, waiting, as patient as morning dew. He stood under the tree holding the droplet, and the world around him seemed to hush, as though honoring that simple truth. All around the tree, other droplets glimmered, each one containing a peaceful daydream. Some held images of sunlit baking, flour on hands, laughter soft and distant. Some held quiet lakes with reeds and birds. Some held libraries with tall shelves and warm lamplight. Some held night skies full of slow-moving constellations. Rowan realized that each dewdrop was like a small pocket of calm, a tiny home for a wandering mind. The mist figure moved closer and placed a hand lightly on the tree trunk. The tree responded with a faint chiming sound, subtle as ice singing. The crystal dewdrops swayed, and a gentle rain of light, not wet, not cold, fell around Rowan like soft snow. As the light touched him, it seemed to smooth his thoughts further, rounding their edges, easing them into quiet. The heaviness of his body returned, but it was a pleasant heaviness like being tucked in. Rowan's eyelids lowered. He could still stand, but he no longer felt the need to. The grass beneath the tree looked inviting, like a bed made by nature. He sat, then lay back slowly, letting the plush grass cradle him. Above him, the branches of the crystal tree arched like a protective canopy. The droplets hung overhead like 1,000 tiny moons. The mist figure sat nearby, watching over him in silence. Rowan's breathing became deep and steady. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. The rhythm of the meadow, the rhythm of the pond, the rhythm of the glade, all carried within him now. As he lay there, daydreams drifted down from the tree in the gentlest way. Not as images that demanded he watch them, but as feelings that washed over him. Warmth, safety, ease. He felt as if he were floating on a calm sea held by invisible hands. The world softened further. The hill, the tree, the droplets, the mist figure, all became quieter, dimmer, as though the dream itself was turning down its lights. And somewhere, far away but not unreachable, the original meadow at dawn continued to shimmer. Dew still clung to grasses. The crescent pond still held the sky. The birch grove still whispered. Rowan's journey, in its essence, was not about arriving anywhere. It was about letting go, one gentle moment at a time. The mist figure, as if sensing that Rowan was ready to drift deeper, raised its gaze to the canopy of droplets. A few of them pulsed softly like sleepy stars. A soothing hush spread through the air. Even the idea of movement became slow. Even the idea of thought became faint. Rowan's mind began to wander without shape. His awareness drifted like fog, thinning, dissolving into softness. The crystal dewdrops above him glowed less brightly now, as if they too were growing sleepy. Their reflections blurred into gentle light. The mist figure's presence remained, calm and steady, like a nightlight in a child's room. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Rowan's breathing was the only clear rhythm left. Slow, even peaceful. In the distance, a lullaby of wind moved through unseen grasses. It wasn't a sound that needed to be followed. It was simply there, like a promise. Rowan's fingers relaxed fully. His feet grew warm. His shoulders sank into the earth's embrace. The dream hill and crystal tree faded to a soft glow, then to a softer glow, then to a gentle darkness that felt safe rather than empty. Everything became quieter. The last thing Rowan seemed to notice was the feeling of a cool dewdrop resting on his palm, like a tiny moon, like a small blessing. Then even that feeling drifted away, leaving only rest. The valley, the meadow, the pond, the glade, all of it became a distant softness, a background lull, like the memory of a peaceful morning. Now the story itself begins to slow, like a river widening into still water. Breath by breath, the world grows dimmer and more gentle. In the quiet, there is nothing to do. In the quiet, there is nowhere to go. There is only the steady comfort of sinking deeper into sleep. The dewdrops somewhere continue to shimmer on grasses, holding tiny skies, holding tiny dreams. And the daydreams somewhere continue to drift like petals on a calm pond, never hurried, never heavy. Everything is peaceful. Everything is slow. Everything is soft. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.